Steve Mignani here at Burnston Auto Wrecking in beautiful Burnston, Massachusetts with the Triumph TR4. Yes, this was once a TR4. Here it is on the cover of Car and Driver magazine, October 61, and these were built between 1961 and 1967. Now, we can see here the frog eye headlamps, which are sort of reminiscent of the TR3 that this replaced. Well, that's all gone, but here's a moot reminder of those unique frog eye looking headlamps. Now, the TR3, of course, was the predecessor to the TR4, but the TR4 brought rack and pinion steering. You can see it right here. TR3 had a steering box and linkage. The beauty of rack and pinion is that it's very simple. The steering column comes down and feeds basically a gear and a slide, if you will, with teeth on it that moves left to right. It's very compact. There's no slop, there's no lash. It's very effective. In fact, this is a great little magazine article. And we can see here the TR4 and the TR3, similar but not the same. And on the next page, kind of a cool cutaway of the car, and up front we can see between the front wheels that rack and pinion sort of in play. Now, one thing is that the standard wheels on these were steel discs with hubcaps, but you could get optional wire wheels. Let's look further. On this one, we go to the front and we can see right there that is the front disc brake. Now, that was also used on the TR3, or at least the majority of them. The first ones had drums, but most TR3s had discs like that. Now, these are a solid rotor, not ventilated. And again, this car is so light that it would be very hard to heat these up. Single piston iron caliper, but again, coil spring up front with a modern telescoping style hydraulic shock. Now, getting back to the wheels, on the back of this thing, we can see the wire wheel right there. Now, you might wonder, how on earth did the wire wheel work? Well, there was a central spline, and of course Corvette P48 knockoff wheels work the same way. But there's an adapter that goes between that spline and this flat hub right here. So these four lug nuts would take the adapter, which would then have the splined cone, which would allow the wire wheel. So this car was a wire wheel vehicle, but they've all been removed except for the right rear corner. Now, going further around this thing, one thing about the TR4 that was new for any Triumph was roll up window glass on the doors. The winders are gone, but we can see on both sides here, there's a piece of glass inside that door. And that was one of the things that really made the TR4 more civil. By contrast, the TR2, TR3 all had side curtains like the Viper had, the first generation Viper. But again, you put that piece of plastic in here, but these had actual roll-up windows, which was really cool. Now, we see the rear suspension on this thing. And again, here's those four lug nuts, which accept the standard steel wheel, or with the adapter, you can put the knockoff wheel on this thing. But leaf springs in the back, there it is right there, and a lever style shock absorber, not the telescope we see up front. So kind of a mixture of retro and advance in the TR4. And we can see that the tin worm has completely taken over, and that was one of the problems with most British sports cars. Now, the bodies were made in Scotland by a company called Pressed Steel, and in fact, Pressed Steel did body shells for many British car makers, not just Triumph. But again, the problem with Pressed Steel was the tin worm. Look at that. This is the textbook definition of tin worm or metal cancer. Look at that, how the chemical effects of moisture and oxidation has actually made this thing into like a piece of Swiss cheese. And that's one of the problems with these cars. They're just so prone to rust. Another issue too was performance. 0 to 60 in 11.5 seconds. Now, you don't buy one of these, or you didn't buy one of these things for fast acceleration. These had a pushrod 4-cylinder engine, although the TR4A had a 6-cylinder engine. But that said, none of these things had big time power. They were more about cornering and braking and riding and looking up at the Buick or the Cadillac in the lane next to you. And it was a whole thing. Post World War II, servicemen coming back from Europe saw the MGTC and said, man, those two-seat sports cars in Europe are cool. And by 1952, 3, 4, 5, the sports car craze was on. And again, the TR4 was just one in several iterations, ending up with the TR7 and TR8 of the 1970s. The TR8 had a V8 in it. But again, this is one of the steps along the way. Now, the price on this thing when it was new was $2,800, which was $1,300 less than a Corvette. So they're similar but different. Of course, Corvette was a more refined car with a V8, 0 to 60 in 8 seconds with the slowest engine, a lot quicker than that with the bigger engines. But with that said, 11.5 seconds, 0 to 60 with this puppy here. Not very fast, but certainly an enjoyable car. But this one's better days are certainly behind it. The Tin Worm has won. But that's the story of the Triumph TR4, 1961 through 67, here at Bernstein Auto Wrecking. If you like this video, well, subscribe to the Steve Maggs YouTube channel and tell your friends all about it.